For most Black Americans, especially those in the South, the front porch isn't just part of the entry into the house. It is the place we enter community. It's not just the comfort or safety we experience there, but it's where we do some people watching and good reflection. On the front porch is where we tell the truth with a little sweetener and an awesome time along the way. We take what we learn and we act. On this episode, we discuss all things related to youth, education, community, and the politics of people.
Welcome back to the front porch, y'all. I'm just going to jump right into it. Today may be a doozy for some of you. As you know, or maybe you don't know, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. And last week, or earlier this week actually, it was earlier this week, there was, and I'm pulling it up for you, there was an AJC, which is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Atlanta's newspaper. There was a post made on their Instagram related to Georgia milestones test score changes from 2019 to 2022. And those dates are very important because we know that 2019 was the year before the pandemic, correct? And 2022 was the first year that students had the option of taking the Georgia milestones. And so we wanted to see the difference, right? The proverbial we wanted to see the difference in how the pandemic impacted students' academic achievement, retention of information, knowledge, skills, that type of thing, really to help implement another plan forward, right? Hopefully, to mitigate some of this. Well, again, like I said, I'm just going to jump right into it. Y'all, we can't blame these test scores on the pandemic because these test scores, excuse my French, were shitty to begin with. And I don't know another word to say. I know folks like, oh, you could have found another word. No, I couldn't. When you hear these numbers, if you're not familiar, there is no other word that I could have used to describe this. And I'm not going to focus on one particular school district. I'm not here to bash any school districts because the reality is that those folks who are currently leading our districts, be it superintendents, associate superintendents, principals, even Board of Education members, did not necessarily create this problem. So there's no blame to give to them. But when they assumed these positions, these titles, these roles, when they ran for office, what they said was that I'm going to assume the responsibility of fixing this problem that, yes, maybe my administration or my leadership did not, start or commit. And herein lies the problem overall, y'all, is everybody's always shifting blame. Everybody's always shifting, well, where did it start and who did it start with? I'm going to take you all the way back because part of the challenges that we see are the things that we don't want to admit. They're the pieces of our society's fabric and history that we want to omit and overlook because it's not comfortable. Because again, there's no one person that we can blame, right? What we're experiencing when we see these low test scores, and I'm going to tell you what they are a little bit later, but what we see with these low test scores is really the latent effects of systemic oppression, racism, economic oppression, and it is starting to, in the words of Malcolm X, they're coming home, chickens are coming home to roost. Like, it is mind-blowing to me. So I told you I was going to go all the way back. We're going all the way back. 1857, United States Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. He ruled against a petition from Dred Scott. I'm going to pause there because I want you to think about who Dred Scott was. I can guarantee that a few of you who are listening to me, just by mention of his name, have no clue who Dred Scott is. Dred Scott was an enslaved person. He was Black. He was enslaved in this country, and he sued the government for his freedom, and he lost. In 1906, Max Weber, who's a sociologist, y'all know I'm a sociology major, or I have a degree in sociology, said that shared customs, not biological traits, determine or distinguish ethnic groups from each other. I don't wholly agree with that. Now, we may see that sometimes when we see folks that don't necessarily share the same skin color, have some characteristics of those of us who share the same skin color. But I don't necessarily think that that means they're a part of our ethnic group because of characteristics. But also think about this, right? Max Weber is German. It's 1906. The idea that there's any mixing of races and ethnic groups was not going to happen anyway, right? So I don't necessarily agree with that. I do subscribe more to Dr. Joy DeGruy's theory around post-traumatic slave syndrome, and I'm not here to debate you about epigenetics and the trauma that is literally embedded in our DNA, because it doesn't mean that we walk around as a victim. It doesn't mean that we are just easily susceptible to struggle all of our lives, but it does mean that we have more to overcome. It does mean that there is something that is literally scientifically and biologically embedded into our DNA that makes us be able to get through struggle a little bit better than some of our counterparts. So again, we can have another discussion around that if you want to. I'm not here to debate you on that piece today. In 1954, what we found, though, is that Brown versus Board of Education, hopefully you also know what that ruling meant, told us that separate accommodations were fine, right? They just needed to be equal. Now, come on now. We already see how that has played out. Now, all the elders in my life that I have ever talked to who lived during segregation, because y'all know my family is a little older than most. My daddy was born 1926. My mommy was born 1945, right? So the people whose biology and DNA collided to make me were literally born during the times of segregation and Jim Crow. I don't need to go to a history book to understand what happened. All I had to do was ask my mommy and my daddy and my aunts and my uncles and my older cousins who lived during those particular time periods. And what most of them have said to me, and other elders that I've talked to that I don't share DNA with as well, has said that it wasn't that desegregation was a problem, it was the way it happened that was the problem, and the reason why most of us still can't get it together. Because what was going on at one point, and we can focus on the civil rights movement, we can focus on all the leaders of the civil rights movement and what it was that they were trying to change for us as related to policy, politics, laws, but the overwhelming sweeping majority felt as though we needed to be accepted by, air quotes, them, in order for desegregation to really take hold. And what we really needed was to be treated with dignity, right? Those are two different things. I don't need to be accepted by anybody else for you to treat me with dignity. And the way desegregation happened was the problem. Not that segregation or desegregation shouldn't have been the goal. It likens to the quote that I've shared on my post before from Mr. Gary Turner about being tolerated, right? That we tolerate things that are a nuisance to us, that are nagging to us until we can get rid of it. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I kind of feel like the Civil Rights Act in its first iteration was a little bit of toleration. Let's go ahead and throw these folks a bone. And then let's figure out how we can still get what it is that we want from them on the back end. I'm just saying. Again, Not pointing blame, because nobody that I know, right, is alive during the time of those decisions. So I'm not pointing the finger. Yeah, I'm just giving you some facts. I'm just saying. All right, so what we do know is that, as I talked about the Civil Rights Act, is that in 1964, it was supposed to end discrimination. But did it really? Did it really? I mean, the fact of the matter is that we cannot legislate love or heart. So having a piece of paper say that discrimination has ended meant that there was no overt discrimination that was going to continue to happen in our society. Not that it was going to end altogether, which is why we have to dig deeper than what we just see and just what we hear and start watching the actions of people. We start seeing the trends of systems and processes and institutions to understand how we get to these test scores that I'm going to talk about in a moment, right? So if we go back to 1906 just for a little bit, W.E.B. Dubois, right? Hopefully you are familiar with that name as well, pointed out, now these are his words, not mine. Let me put a disclaimer here because I don't want nobody coming for my head. But what he pointed out was that no white person was willing to talk about race explicitly. Again, 1906 does not mean that today white folks don't want to talk about race. It still is probably a little cringy for most of them. But in 1906, he said that no white person that he knew was willing to talk about race explicitly. Instead, what they chose to do was act out prejudice in various ways. Now, this was, for me, the foretelling of what was happening in 1964 for the Civil Rights Act that was going to end discrimination on paper. So I'll end it on paper, but I'll still find a way to act out my prejudice in various ways. That is what Du Bois said in 1906, and that is subsequently what we saw in 1964. Because we have things like redlining still to this day, right? Which still exists, and I will venture to say that I'm going to add gentrification to that list right now. It's not that gentrification is bad. We all want to see growth. We should all want to live in harmony. It's how gentrification happens and what it says in action, even if this is not the intent, is that I'm not going to fix your sidewalks. I'm not going to bring economic development to your community until somebody white or somebody that is on a higher socioeconomic stratosphere, be it black, white, Latino, Asian, what have you, decides that they deem your street, your block, your neighborhood worthy. That is the problem with gentrification. Not that we don't want to see folks that don't look like us come in and raise their families and, build wealth for their families. But for real, you didn't think the street needed to be fixed until somebody white wanted to come buy property over here. You didn't think that black folks drank Starbucks. You didn't think that we wanted nice restaurants until other folks decided that they came. But other folks also know how to advocate for themselves because they, back to epigenetics, did not have to struggle as hard to get the things that were just simply handed to them. But I'm going off on a tangent, so let me get back to the point. What whites really wanted to know, again, Du Bois's words, not mine, don't come from my head, is how does it feel to be a problem? This was in 1906, okay? The question today that I would submit is, some folks are probably walking around asking what seems to still be your problem. Du Bois will go on to say that he didn't think that there was an answer to that question because blacks didn't see themselves as a problem. Well, duh. I don't know how to answer your question about how does it feel to be a problem. I'm going to insert this. I have very rarely told this story, but I'm going to tell it here. I'm out here. Y'all already going to be talking about me. So let me just give you something factual to talk about. Now, in the wisdom of my mother, I am careful about names and identifying facts to give to folks because you just never know what bridge you got to cross again, okay? But for those who know, they know. I worked for a corporation that was led by a woman, and then this was a big corporation, okay? And the person that I was directly reporting to came to me one day and says, "How does it feel to be different?" Now, this was a mostly, staffed organization of women, but they did not look like me. So she came to me and she asked, "How does it feel to be different?" And she kept just all around the mulberry bush, right? Just tap dancing all around the bush. And finally, I said to her, "Well, you mean what does it feel like to be black and fat?" And she got red in the face. And she was like, "Well, you just handle it with so much grace." I'm like, this is just who I be. I'm not going to dim my light. I'm not going to dumb myself down. I'm not going to walk around insecure because y'all white and thin. Like, you really want to know how does it feel to be black and fat in a space that is mostly white women? I'm like, come on. So I should have already known that was the beginning of the end, and I didn't make it long at that particular company because there was a lot of microaggressions that was happening along the way. But literally, what was this? 2018, 2019? I was still being asked by a white woman, how does it feel to be different? In a sense, the same question that Dubois said in 1906 that whites really wanted to know from blacks. How does it feel to be a problem? I don't see myself as a problem. Blacks don't see themselves as the problem. Our children don't see themselves as the problem. So, with that said, let's get into this Atlanta Journal-Constitution article from August 5th. And I hope you got some tea or at least probably something stronger because I'm about to go there. Respectfully, of course. So this was on August 7th that this article was released. And the title said, Georgia Milestones Test Score Changes from 2019 to 2022. Again, y'all, I'm not here to lay blame. I'm going to call out a couple of things because the demographics of these particular districts probably are also a little foretelling of some of the things that I want to highlight as well. And, we're not going to like it. And, that's just the reality of it. And I don't even know where to start with this. I don't know where to start with this. Let's just start with it. Gwinnett County is probably one of our most diverse school districts. Okay? The percent of third graders reading at a grade level or above. Percent of third graders reading at grade level or above in Gwinnett County, which is one of our most diverse districts in the metro Atlanta area. In 2019, their test scores for third graders reading at grade level or above was 79.3%. In 2022, it was at 72.9%. So it took a little bit of a dive, but we were still at the 70th percentile or above, right? Decatur City Schools. Decatur City Schools is not very diverse, folks, okay? Decatur City Schools is akin to why we have Atlanta Public Schools and Fulton County Schools, and why Decatur City and DeKalb County have different schools. But that is a different conversation as well. Decatur City Schools in 2019, percent of third graders reading at grade level or above was 93.8%. They're doing the doggone thing, okay? And 2022, it was 89.7%. Pretty freaking amazing, okay? Beaufort City, okay? Probably not very diverse either. was at 86% in 2019 for third graders reading at grade level or above. And in 2022, they actually went up, y'all. Even during the pandemic, they went up to 87.2%. Forsyth County. Now, again, I hope some of these words are triggers for you, because I believe Forsyth County was the county that Oprah went to years ago in the 80s, where folks still didn't want Black people to move into their city, into their county. But I digress. In 2019, they were at 89% of third graders reading at grade level or above. And in 2022, they were at 82.1%. Again, y'all, I'm not here this ain't a blame game. Hear me. I need us to know these numbers. I need us to know why we're at these numbers if we're ever going to fix it. Clayton County. I'm going to save Clayton. Let's go to Atlanta. Let's go to Atlanta Public Schools. Third graders reading at grade level or above in 2019 was at 63.7%. In 2022, it dropped 10 points. Well, I'll give you 9. We'll round that 63 to 64. 63.7% to 4 to 64%. I'll give you 9 points instead of 10. In 2022, it dropped to 53%. In Clayton County, 2019, percent of third graders reading at grade level or above was at 61%. In 2022, y'all, it dropped to 39. Where's my calculator? Because I don't want to misquote. We went from 61%. Yep, I'm using a calculator. This should probably tell you something. To 39.1%. Y'all, that was a 22% or 22-point drop. That's reading. Let's scroll on over to third graders proficient in ELA. These are our social sciences, our humanities, our social studies, our history. Let's talk about this. Okay, I'm going to try to hit some of the same so that you can see the difference. Gwinnett County, again, 2019, 49.8%, roughly 50%, dropped to 45%. Okay. Forsyth County was at 68%. It dropped to 59%. DeKalb. I didn't mention DeKalb before, did I? Nope. DeKalb was kind of right there with us. They're not very diverse either. And, meaning that they're mostly Black like Atlanta and Clayton are. So let's just say it, because I didn't make that clear for you. Some of you all like to not read between the lines. It's called willful ignorance. So let me just make it plain. So if we go back to DeKalb so we can get them caught up, in 2019, they were at 64%. They dropped to 54. So a 10-point drop too. When it comes to ELA, they went from 33.5 to 28%. Clayton was at 27% in 2019. They dropped to 15% in 2022. Atlanta was at 37. It dropped to 30. When we get to 8th graders in math, Beaufort was at 79%, dropped to 78%. Not much difference there. They were holding steady. Forsyth increased. Again, a county, a district that increased amongst the pandemic. From 61% in 2019, they went to 66% in 2022. Decatur increased, went from 50% to 61%. Cherokee County went from 42% to 50%. Atlanta increased as well by a point. 24% 8th graders proficient in math to 25%. Clayton went from 16% down to 15%. Y'all, I'm looking at some of these comments talking about we have work to do. What happened? Is anyone surprised? Tell me again. Being sarcastic, remote learning is effective. Is anyone talking about how bad the scores were before COVID? My question, right? I would like to see this same chart, but for schools that went back in person learning sooner. Look, again, folks are asking all the wrong questions. My question is akin to one of these comments. Y'all not paying attention to how bad these scores were prior to the pandemic, which tells me the pandemic didn't do anything but exacerbate what the problem already was. Do not let any educational leader tell you that the problem was COVID. The problem was not COVID. COVID highlighted where the inequities were. COVID highlighted where we were losing ground already. COVID highlighted where folks was just doing enough to collect a check. COVID highlighted where we were focused more on innovation than we were on the basics. COVID highlighted in certain areas that we were more concerned with building buildings than building our children. Was it Frederick Douglass who said that it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men? We're ignoring the building of our children. And then when they get to be of the age of the folks who are in my program and they happen to be Black and they're boys and they can't read, they can't do math, they have no social skills, they've been promoted just because nobody wants to deal with them in their class anymore. They don't have conflict resolution. They get sent back out into these streets, which means they're now part of the penal system because they're getting arrested and locked up at 14, 15, 16 years old, which is why the penal system looks at these third grade reading scores to determine how many more contracts are we going to give to private prisons, because we know that they're going to get filled, because ain't no way these Black boys are going to be able to make it in these streets because they don't have anything that they're going to be able to monetize in order to be contributing members of society. This ain't about COVID. This is not about a pandemic. This is about all those things that I was sharing with you in the little mini history lesson that we were given prior to. But I'm going to go back some more. And let's talk about how nothing that we're seeing is surprising to me. But what is baffling to me is for all of these educated people who are in positions of power, influence, and policy making, who refuse to look at the truth, acknowledge it, and figure out how do we build from there, not from what we want to see. Here we go. Debate me if you want to on this. Go research it for yourself. Public school was designed for Black people. Now, I know I did an episode that talked about the Industrial Revolution and, folks having to send their kids to school because more women were going into the work field and all of that. And that is true. But before we got there, we got to go back to the Emancipation Proclamation and the freeing of the slaves and go back to the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay? Public school was designed for Blacks. Now, knowing this, how surprised are we that Blacks are also the group that is most impacted and served the least holistically when we look at public schools as a whole? Again, this ain't pointing a finger at any particular district, so miss me with the comments, all right? I am pro public schools. Our tax dollars pay for it, so it should be the best possible choice for our children. Unfortunately, y'all, it isn't always so. So above all things, I am pro-student, and caregivers should be given the option of choosing whatever is best for their student based on what is available to them. Y'all, two things can be true at the same time. I can be pro-public school and understand that there's still a lot of work to do in our public schools, and be go get your kids the education that they need so that they can show up strong in this world, right? So for all y'all ready to start rumors about me, that I'm anti this and anti that, miss me with all that, Imagine me rolling my eyes at you. All right, let's just continue. Because this has got me fired up this morning because these are about our babies. And for those of you who know me personally, you know that this is the work that I do. This is part of the reason why I ran for office last year. I didn't win. That's fine. Every loss is not a loss, because I can guarantee you that had I won, I couldn't have this conversation with you. I couldn't say the things that need to be said to, as my daddy would remind us, to hold people's feet to the fire. Like, you're going to be accountable. Nobody's going to let y'all keep skating under the guise of innovation, under the guise of equity. And we don't see either of those things playing out in real time in a way that impacts our children. Before I go any further about the Freedmen's Bureau, I want y'all to realize something. I want you to know something. That Science Daily did an article in 2019, so it wasn't that long ago. I know sometimes people be pulling quotes from like 2002 and 2006 and all of that. In 2019, and this was actually a study done by Ohio State University. It said that young children whose parents read them 5 books a day enter kindergarten having heard about 1.4 million more words than kids who were never read to at all or read to less than the 5 books a day entering kindergarten. Now, if y'all know anything about kids' books, these books are 6-7 pages long. It is pretty easy to read 5 books to your children a day. And they don't necessarily have to be books. You can read an excerpt from the newspaper. When I was coaching parents, I would tell them, put the captions on the television. Let them read the captions with the sound off. Let them read a recipe to you as you're cooking. Tell them to read the ingredients off of a box so that they also know what they're consuming in their body. Have them read the street signs for you as you're traveling, even if it's a way that you already know that you're going. The goal is to read to your children, to foster a love of reading, but also to practice the skill for them. This 1,000,000-word gap could be one key in explaining differences in vocabulary and reading development. Also, let me just put a little pin here. The organization that I helped to co-lead, we sponsored, until the pandemic hit, a book festival specifically for Black children. Why? Because we understood this 1,000,000-word gap. Also, some foolishness with Scholastic. And we said, you know what? If we can get in the hands of our people books that look like them, that are written by them, that are written for them, then maybe parents and caregivers would be more likely to read those books because children would want to hear those books being read to them more. So if you're already entering kindergarten with a 1,000,000-word gap, it is really going to be challenging to get caught up because reading helps to build skills for interpretation, engagement, inference, right? Sight words are really important because, y'all, let's just face it, English is a really hard language to learn. So for all y'all who tell folks who are not from this country, go learn English. Newsflash, half of y'all can't speak English. I don't speak English properly and correctly all of the time. And a lot of times I am having an internal debate in my head. Did I say the proper word? Did I make sure that my verbs and my, adjectives and nouns didn't split and subjugate and conjugate and all of those things? And so I have a degree working on a third one, and I'm still struggling a little bit with English because have y'all seen some of these sight words? Have you literally just Googled the sight word list? We say words and then we don't always understand what it may feel like to a 4 and 5-year-old having to look at a word. And it's like, but what you taught me in terms of what this letter sound is supposed to make, and the long A and the short A and the long E and the short E, and how these things fit into a consonant. And I know that as a long A if there is a vowel on the end of the word, because I taught phonics, okay? But this does not sound like that when I take each of these individual words or letters and just sound them out as you've taught me. And then if there's no one at home who's reinforcing this, I understand why my babies are having a hard time when they get in school, because y'all, just let's admit it. I think if a teacher walked in the building and said, I'm going to teach English today, and this is one of the hardest languages to learn in the world, I think students and families would be a little bit more open if we just admit, y'all, it's not easy. The fact that we could have one word that is spelled the same way, but is pronounced differently based on the context. Anyway, I'm again getting off on a tangent. Million word gap, right? We have a million word gap. What we also realize is the fact that we need to start early childhood education sooner. My mom taught in the public education system in Virginia Beach, Virginia for almost 40 years. And what I pride my family on, and that's not to say nobody else's family does this, is that we don't do baby talk with the children in our lives. From day one, when they come out the womb. Now, our tone may be a little softer, right? But we speak in complete sentences. I have a cousin, just graduated from high school, on his way to college, is going to do phenomenal things. And we were always so impressed by his ability to string a whole entire coherent, full sentence together at 2 and 3 years old, where he could answer a question with full understanding at 2 and 3 and 4 years old, because every time we talk to him in full sentences. We have to understand that our children absolutely mimic what it is that we do daily in front of them, to them, for them, and with them. We are, as a culture, very used to keeping our babies at home with grandma, with auntie, with mama, with daddy, whomever. And they don't get the socialization, but they also don't get the benefit of hearing from trained, educated professionals on how to begin those foundational building blocks that are going to help them when they enter into school. Now, I know the world is crazy, and sometimes it is safer to physically keep our children at home. I also know that daycare costs are absolutely ridiculous. I have friends who are well equipped financially to be able to pay to send their children to private daycare, to daycare centers that have an educational component to it. It's not just babysitting. And these folks are paying well over their own mortgage. That their biggest bill is to send their child to a quality daycare system. Y'all, why is daycare so expensive? Why are educational centers for children who are 2 and 3 years old the cost of someone's home mortgage? Well, again, did we ever stop to think that maybe that's by design? Did we ever stop to think that maybe we know that economically and fiscally, the median average for Black families is well under that of white families? The Brookings Institute put out an article. Let me give you the date so y'all can go fact check me, okay? December 8th, 2020. And in this article, in 2019, they state the median white household held $188,200 in wealth, 7.8 times that of the typical Black household, which was at $24,100. Now, again, this is median, right? We know plenty of rich Black folks. We know plenty of white poor folks. But on average, y'all, let me just continue from the article. It is worth noting that the levels of average wealth, which are more heavily skewed by households with the greatest amount of wealth, are higher. White households reported an average wealth of $983,000, which is 6.9 times that of Black households at $142,000. While median wealth is more reflective of the typical household, the scale of average wealth is indicative of the outsized levels of wealth held in the richest households. And that the Black-white wealth gap today is a continuation of decades-long trends and wealth inequality. Over the past 30 years, the median wealth of white households has consistently dwarfed that of Black households, ranging from a gap of $106,900 in 1992 to $185,400 in 2007. Both of these have been adjusted for inflation. So, if we know that white households are historically, on average, there's always an exception to the rule, have more money, have more wealth, then I understand why private daycare is more expensive, because inherently, the goal was never for Black kids to go. Told you I was going to go to the Freedmen's Bureau, right? Let's get back there. In 1863, when slavery was abolished, in theory, there's still, as I mentioned earlier, the penal system, but that's an entirely different episode. The government set up the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Land. Okay, here's a full stop, y'all. How are you a refugee of a land you were born on? Now, I identify as Black and not as African American. Whole nother episode as to why you may hear folks who look like me, who have similar experiences as I, have this debate of Black versus African American. Not having that with you today, okay? I'm a Black person, I'm a Black American who is fully aware that I am a member of the diaspora, that my roots run deep, especially related to my Gullah Geechee heritage. But I was born here. I'm not a refugee of a land that I was born on. But I think we had this debate already post-Katrina in 2005. So, again, another conversation. And while we're at it, how do you call stolen land abandoned? Let's just keep going. Or maybe, even in 1863, these terms were intentional to give folks a little bit of empowerment to do what they was going to do anyway, which was then, after Reconstruction, Jim Crow, civil rights, sharecropping, Okay, I'm digressing again, so back on topic, KaCey. Sometimes I gotta talk to myself. Anyway, this Freedmen's Bureau. And let me ask this question. How many of you were aware of the Freedmen's Bureau before I mentioned this? Now, again, I told y'all, my daddy was born in 1926. My mom was born in 1945. So I had a little bit more knowledge of our history as Blacks in this country long before I got to school. And I went to a predominantly white school. Virginia Beach is predominantly white, in case you didn't know. I know a lot of folks like to ooh and ah when they hear where I was born and raised, but it's predominantly white. My neighborhood was all Black until like the last 15, 20 years or so. And I went to a all Black church, and my family is Blackity Black, Black, Black. So I was very conscious of who I was, who I am, and the sacrifices that my people made, and all the stories we still don't hear in the history books was a part of daily conversation in my home. So I was aware of the Freedmen's Bureau prior to me getting research and pulling topics for today's conversation. But I don't remember ever hearing about the Freedmen's Bureau in school. Like when I think about history in Virginia Beach City Public Schools, and I don't know what they're teaching now, right? Like I graduated high school in 1998, so I don't know. But I know when I was in school, we talked a lot about, witches, ponies of Chickadee, lighthouses. Yeah, that was kind of like the extent. Oh, I do remember a couple of pages in a history book and a social studies book about slavery. And then I was given the assignment to have to reconstruct using, like a shoebox or something, what a slave plantation would look like. But yeah, I don't remember hearing about Dubois or the Freedmen's Bureau or Dred Scott or Brown versus Board of Education. So shout out to my HBCU experience, because what my parents didn't give me, Morris Brown sure did fill in the gaps. All right, back to this. So the Freedmen's Bureau was to issue food, clothing, and abandoned property to the quote-unquote flood of destitute fugitive slaves. Sit with that language. Y'all, it is cringy, even for me, right? But not surprisingly, this bureau was also run by ill-equipped military personnel who had no clue how to deal with social reorganization. Because guess what? They didn't have to engage in it. And I'm also seeing a trend here all the way from 1863 that people who are ill-equipped because they've never had the experience before making decisions for folks who are literally engaged in said activity. What does that mean, KaCey? You got folks who never struggled trying to figure out how to solve economic disparities for people who've been living struggle all their lives. You got people trying to fix systems when the system was designed for them to win. You got folks who are thought leaders and policymakers, and they get to go home to their suburban 5-bedroom homes, driving their Teslas and their Mercedes. And again, I love those cars and I hope to own one myself. And I want a house so big that I have a veranda and a wraparound porch and acres of land in the back. So there's nothing wrong with that. But do you check your bias? And this is black and white. Do you check your bias when you go into your now $1 million home, as we have now learned has been the first to be sold in Cascade here in Atlanta, and understand that maybe you don't understand the struggle as much anymore if you're not consciously aware of it? Because it's one thing to tap into what you've gone through and use it. It's another thing to live in it. And a lot of times we want to remove ourselves so far from struggle that we forget what it was. And now we're looking down on people who are still currently enmeshed in it. What is said to be one of the greatest accomplishments, though, of the Freedmen's Bureau, because remember I told you that public school was designed for Blacks, was the provision of free schools for all the children in the South. But here was the rub, even for Dubois. This was already problematic. Again, his words, not mine, but y'all, I'm going to rock with it. This was already problematic because how do you educate children you believe are inferior and that an educated Black person was a dangerous Black person? Y'all, let me just stop here. What if our leaders was talking like Dubois, talking like Booker T. Washington, talking like Frederick Douglass, right? Let's even go and talking like Benjamin Elijah Mays. Where are our leaders that are going to give it to us straight? Understanding this ain't about a blame game. Y'all, I love all people. I have folks that I call friend who do not share the same racial makeup as me. This ain't about personal anything. This is about systems and how these systems are still designed to keep our children reading at a proficiency level that is below 40%. There's so much more I could say there, but I'm going to leave it. He says, how do you educate children you believe are inferior and that an educated Black person was a dangerous Black person? Now, I'm not saying that today people believe that Black children are inferior. That's not what I'm saying. So hear me clearly, okay? What I'm saying is that we're still educating children in a system that was designed at a time where people believe children to be inferior if they were of Black and African lineage and heritage. But here's my commentary to that. You don't educate them. And that is clearly what we're seeing. You do just enough to ensure that they are compliant workers. And when they're not compliant workers, then you have a prison and penal system that you can now place them into. So, yeah, I'm probably going to end up dedicating the whole episode to the Freedmen's Bureau because it also shows up in the banking practices that they designed. And it also shows up in the legal and justice system that was designed by them as well. All right. So we talked about these statistics in this AJC article, and this is not an indictment on any system. This is about our children and somebody having to say the hard things and not worried about if it hurts your feelings. I tell people often, I don't do well with adult bullies. And I don't really care about adult feelings when it comes to the work of our youth and it comes to the work of our children. So if your feelings are hurt, good. Let them be hurt enough to change. Let them be hurt enough to do something within your wheelhouse. Because if we think about it, y'all, like if we get into the semantics as I begin to close, the grand scheme of things that when a child enters into kindergarten and first grade and they are learning phonics and, I can already hear Gracie's Corner with the phonics song, right? As soon as I said that in the back of my mind, is y'all from learning phonics and letter sounds to third grade, that's not a lot of time. How is it that we're teaching phonics and then by third grade, they still can't read? Somebody answer that for me? Because somebody answer for me that by the time they enter kindergarten and first grade, where we are teaching letter sounds, phonics, that by third grade, proficiency at reading at third grade level is below 40% in so many of our districts that are majority Black. I'm really just trying to get my mind around it. Kindergarten to first grade phonics, to third grade, and they can't read. Let me end here. Because as you can see, I've talked about this for a very long time. I was in Best Buy recently, and there was an 18-year-old in there, and I think he was trying to get the newest iPhone. And the Best Buy technician was trying to get him to get a credit check so that he could, I guess, get on a payment plan. Because, y'all know. Again, y'all hear me say things, and I'm not saying these things because they're bad. I have an iPhone. I know how much a brand new iPhone costs, which means that I have some level of privilege too, okay? But me understanding that I also operate in some level of privilege does not negate the fact that some things are just what they are. So he was trying to lease a phone, buy a phone, whatever. And that young man was over there sweating bullets, y'all. And so the salesperson was doing their job. It's like, y'all, man, it's easy. This is your first foray into credit because, think about when you have to run credit and get a loan for a car and for a house. And I'm like, I wouldn't really advise an 18-year-old to get a loan, right, to purchase a phone. And we're having this debate back and forth. And what the 18-year-old said to me is, why didn't no one ever teach me this? He said no one in his family talked to him about credit. He said nobody in his school ever talked to him about credit. He's an 18-year-old. He's a recent high school graduate. This is not someone who's still mid-20s, early 30s. Recent high school graduate, and in the year of our Lord 2022, we still are not teaching again the things in school that are going to set our children up for success. And you know why we don't teach them? Because inherently we believe that certain things should be taught at home. But then when we look at some of the demographics of our students, some of those homes are really just doing enough to survive. Do you think that they are equipped to sit down and talk about credit when mama and daddy can't even get a checking account opened? So while I do think that there are some things that should be nurtured at home and taught at home, the fact is that a lot of our homes that serve a lot of our children in these urban school districts are not equipped. And so, yes, that is the responsibility of those wraparound services in our schools to fill in the gap, to hold up the arms of those families, to do what we can to ensure that we're not sending another generation of young people out into this world ill-equipped to manage. Someone could say, it's not my job to raise your child as a teacher. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I hate all that teachers have to do, particularly in urban Black school districts. You got to be mama and auntie and big sister and protector and nurse and counselor and errand runner, right? And teaching manners and teaching hygiene. You know, I know stories of teachers who have had to explain to young people how to properly wipe themselves. No, you did not go to college and get in student loan debt to then have to come into a classroom to have to teach a child how to properly wipe themselves. And it's a shame that that is what some of our schools have become. But this thing is interwoven, y'all. Schools are not siloed from what is happening in our cities and our neighborhoods and our communities. And once we realize that all of these things work together and we're honest about how we got to the situation in the first place, we can then begin to find the solutions to move us forward. That's why I go so hard for my boys. Because for as much as I can control it, I'm not about to send another group of young people into the world feeling unloved, unsupported, misunderstood, because it's hard work, because someone should have taught them before they got there. Where's their mama? Their mama, for some of them, are working 3 jobs trying to get off of welfare. For some of them, their mama has experienced so much trauma that in order to just cope every day, they can't deal with not one more thing. But again, for those of us who have not had that experience and we've moved past whatever our struggle was, so easily forget that there are some who still haven't moved out of that, because those of us who had bootstraps to pull ourselves up by never went back to then give those same straps to somebody else. So if you're concerned about these test scores, get concerned about the condition of our families, get concerned about the conditions of our neighborhoods and our communities, get concerned about the condition of our leaders and our policymakers, and make sure they are as focused on building people as they are on economic development. Because in the words of our great esteemed mayor here in Atlanta, we're not so concerned about how many buildings are in Atlanta, but how many Atlantans are in that building. But that has to become intentional. There has to be a framework and a strategy around making sure that happens, because so much is changing in this particular city that folks are going to come in and do what it is that they want to do before we even figure out how to get Atlantans in that building. I heard my friend Andrea Miller a couple of years ago say this, and I have taken it and I use it everywhere I go. Start making these corporations pay their tithes. I am in full support of community benefit agreements. Why? Because you are a billion-dollar entity displacing folks who were scraping every last thing they had to try to keep together what they had. You have displaced them to put your headquarters up, to put your operations hub up in the name of more jobs, but our children and our families are not educated and equipped to receive those jobs. So you send people from other parts of the country into our city to move into homes that are being built on Bankhead for $800,000. Who on Bankhead that was born and raised on Bankhead outside of TI can afford an $800,000 townhome? You didn't build those houses for the Bankhead residents. You didn't build those houses for Grove Park. You didn't build those houses for English Avenue, Vine City, Washington Park, Asheville Heights. Not a thing in the world wrong with it. Because if I could afford an $800,000 house, I'd probably go buy one too, because I love luxury just as much as the next person. But I'm also very aware that whether I have the skills and the money to buy it wasn't necessarily designed for the people that were displaced for the building to go up in the first place. And yes, that has everything to do with education, because when our children are transient, they're not going to retain the information and the knowledge. When our children constantly have to work through the mental acrobats of now going to a new school in a new neighborhood on a new bus route because their family could no longer afford to stay where they were because of all of the change that was happening, we discount, we disregard, and we ignore the emotional work that our children and the mental work our children have to do to get reacclimated to a new place. Because when our children are not stable, they're still not going to learn, even with the best education and the best teachers. Y'all want to see these scores go up? Then let's have a holistic conversation about everything that is happening in our cities. You want to see these test scores go up? Let's have a very honest conversation that school as it's designed was not meant for Black children to succeed. But we have a chance to change all of that. We have all of the tools necessary for it to be different. But if we don't first call it out, if we first don't name it, we can't change it, y'all. What do they say? When you are trying to break a habit, when you are trying to make better decisions, something along the lines of you first have to admit that you have a problem before you can seek help. When are we going to admit that we had a problem, that we have a problem, not one that any of us created? So there's no blame. But when you got in position of power, you assume the responsibility of it. And we can't keep skating around the issue because it makes people uncomfortable. I don't care about your feelings in that regard. The lives of our children, that is a collective, Black, white, Native, Asian, Hispanic. Our children, the lives of our children are at stake because we're concerned about placing blame. We are concerned about, oh, why do you keep bringing up the past? Just get over it. I can't get over it when it's the past that created the systems that you still thrive from and my people are still struggling from. Not going to get over it. And until these test scores change, It's going to be really hard to change my mind. Because if what I submitted to you in this hour-long podcast is not a part of the problem, then you tell me why our children can't read, why our children can't do math. Are you telling me that our teachers are ill-equipped? That's a lie. I know some dope teachers who do a whole lot with a little. You're going to tell me that we don't have the best and the latest technology in our schools? That's a lie. Are you going to tell me that we constantly keep choosing all of the wrong board members? Holistically, I'd venture to say that's kind of a lie, because I'll be honest, people don't always run for office because they want to make change. But again, that's another topic. But I don't think holistically we've always had horrible board members. I don't think we have them now. We always keep choosing the wrong superintendent? No. We always keep choosing the wrong principal? Well, what this sounds like to me is the definition of insanity. If we keep doing the same things and looking for a different result, and then we are the problem, people. It's that we won't be honest, but we also won't work together, and we won't dismantle the systems as they are, understanding that we can't keep doing what we've been doing and looking for a different result. I have sat in enough therapy to know when I see crazy. I can see it a mile away. I can call it out, because first I had to identify it in myself. And some of our systems are insane, y'all. Some of our systems need to go sit on a couch. Some of our systems need some cognitive redevelopment. But we first got to get honest about how and why the system was never designed for our children, for Black children to win. I said as the system was designed, not the people who are implementing the system as it is today. And again, once we realize that, then maybe we can figure out how to move forward. All right, y'all. Thanks for rocking with me today. No, we were a little longer, but y'all know this is my jam. These babies, this education, how we show up in this world is important to me. And we got to do better by them. And I hope your feelings were hurt. I hope you were rubbed the wrong way. I hope somebody was offended. I hope somebody is going to look at me side-eye. I hope folks are wondering who's she talking about. I want all those questions. I want you to ask and have all those questions, because that means that I at least punctured a hole in your little bubble. And I want us to get to the bottom of this, because we have it within our power to fix it. Is whether or not we want to disrupt life as we know it to do it. I'll see y'all next time on the front porch.